From the very start of the Trump presidency, as he was sworn in with all the big tech bosses sitting in the front row, it's been absolutely crystal clear why business people have supported Donald Trump. They will choose deregulation over everything. Over democracy, over fairness, over being able to attract workers. Business will choose deregulation over everything. People have been asking me, will the business community stand up to Trump? Zero chance. Why would they? They got the deal they wanted, and so did Trump. As the Wall Street Journal reports yesterday, Trump spent the months before taking office hosting lavish dinners for healthcare executives, raking in hundreds of millions of dollars from them in return for influence. And remember back in May when Trump asked oil executives at Mar-a-Lago for a $1 billion donation while promising to slash policies on electric vehicles and wind energy? Trump's approach to business leaders totally ignores the responsibility of the U.S. government to regulate business and protect consumers. And we're witnessing in real time now the corrosive effect of unchecked corporate power and wealth. There are laws in place, most effectively antitrust laws, that are meant to be a check on the consolidation of wealth and power. Those laws were wielded to great effect by the Federal Trade Commission in the 3.5 years that Lina Khan chaired the agency. She sued Amazon for being a monopoly and investigated Microsoft for abusing its market power. She blocked the merger of grocery giants Kroger's and Albertsons. She stopped mergers at NVIDIA, Lockheed Martin, and HCA Healthcare. She took action against companies like Grubhub and Lyft for misleading workers. She sued pharmacy benefit managers for artificially inflating the price of insulin. The aggressive antitrust position made Lina Khan very unpopular on Wall Street. But it was some of the most robust consumer protection from the FTC in decades. And Lina Khan, the former chair of the Federal Trade Commission, joins me now. Thank you for being with us.
Great to be with you.
I just want to underscore this point. In many cases, the things you were doing were laws that were on the books, meant to protect Americans, that were simply not enforced in previous administrations in some cases.
That's right. The antitrust laws go all the way back to 1890, the Sherman Antitrust Act, and then we had the Clayton Act and the FTC Act in 1914. And these laws were really about wanting to make sure that we had an economy that was competitive, that was fair, where people could get a fair shake, but ultimately also about wanting to make sure that our democracy was being protected from unchecked concentrations of economic power and fundamentally from oligarchy. And so these are laws that have been around for decades. Starting in the Reagan administration, there was a real pivot, a pretty radical shift away from enforcing the laws faithfully. And so we saw decades of unchecked consolidation, monopolization that has really harmed Americans, has made them poorer, has allowed companies to charge people more while paying them less, squeezing out small businesses, reducing innovation, and really hollowing out communities. And so it was a great honor to get to chair the Federal Trade Commission and really be focused on reinvigorating all of the tools that Congress gave us.
Let's just talk about competition. When businesses are able to get too big, it squeezes out the ability of new people to enter. So the Silicon Valley is a great example of that. A lot of these massive companies were started. They were little startups started in people's garages and things like that. But in fact, the unchecked power of Silicon Valley wealth means it's much harder for that to replicate itself. Little small competitors can't compete against the big players.
That's right. I mean, I had the chance to go out to Silicon Valley several times, met with founders and startups that want to be the next great big company, but all too often found that existing monopolization and the existing gatekeepers were making it extraordinarily difficult for them to fairly compete. And what that means is that if you have startups that are taking that risk and have the talent to introduce the next great idea, unless our markets are open and fair, they're never going to be able to succeed. And that's really just deeply antithetical to what has made America's economy so strong.
So no one's going to have trouble understanding the fact that if they're monopolies, you probably pay more for a service. What I think is a little more abstract is how is the concentration of wealth, how does it undermine democracy? Clearly, we're watching some of that happen right now. But how do you articulate that? What's the danger of having too much concentration of wealth as it relates to a healthy democracy?
So the founders and those who really were formative in passing the original antitrust laws were really concerned that if you allow unchecked concentrations of economic power, that undermines people's liberties in a really fundamental way. And if what we care about in America is wanting to make sure people have freedom, that we're protecting them from the arbitrary exercise of power. That means we need to have checks and balances in our sphere of government, but it also means that we need checks and balances in our commercial sphere. Because if you have a democracy in name, but are allowing people to be bullied and coerced and pushed around by monopolists, that really is going to undermine how people experience freedom in their day-to-day lives. There was a great quote where Senator Sherman said, if we overthrew a monarch, we didn't do that just to be ruled by autocrats of trade. And so there was a real idea that protecting real liberty and democracy meant needing rules, not just in our sphere of government, but also in how we structure the economy.
Obviously, under the Biden administration, the FTC was very aggressive under your leadership. But it's not actually a completely partisan thing. You had some allies, some Republican allies. There are still a number of Republicans who think that America is better if businesses do face some degree of regulation.
That's right. I've been really struck by the degree to which people on both sides of the aisle are extremely skeptical of monopolies, of unchecked corporate power. I had the chance in my job at the FTC to travel across the country, meet with farmers in Iowa or pharmacists in Kansas City or gig drivers from Minneapolis. And all of them were really struggling with the ways that corporations, when they're not checked by the rules, can abuse their power and really harm people fundamentally. I would get letters from people saying, I'm a lifelong Republican, but the FTC's rule to eliminate non-compete clauses is the best thing the government has done in my life. And so I think there is a real organic hunger from people who want to see their government fighting back against corporate lawbreaking. And that's what we did at the FTC.
Where are we now? Because in all the noise about what's going on in Washington and DOJ, in fact, some of the rules and some of the determinations you made as chair of FTC are still in place. It hasn't been dismantled. I don't know whether to end that with a yet or not. Where do you think we're going?
Well, look, it's too early to know. And of course, it's been extraordinarily alarming to see the dismantling of agencies like the CFPB, which have been such critical partners to the FTC. But you're right. I mean, look, there were lawsuits against big tech that were started in the first Trump administration. And then in the Biden administration, we kind of picked up that baton and kept going. And so I think you're definitely going to see some areas where now that we're back in the Trump administration, we're going to see some of that activity continue as well. But I do get the sense that there is a real factional debate between the more populist wing and the more oligarchic wing, and we're going to have to see how things shake out.
And this becomes very important right now because, in fact, if you look at things like the Edelman Trust Barometer, Americans actually trust businesses more than they trust government or media. But I don't believe that businesses are going to come to our rescue in this particular instance. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm being, I'm exaggerating. But I think businesses get what they want when they say they don't want regulation. If the administration promises them we will not regulate you, they win.
Well, look, at the FTC, we actually heard from a lot of small and independent businesses that were also feeling squeezed by the monopolists. Yes. And so I do think it's a fairly small band of incumbents and monopolists and dominant firms that want to make sure that the rules are rigged so that others can't get ahead. And you absolutely need the laws enforced and to have a cop on the beat to make sure we're not seeing predation and cheating.